Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you may be tuning in or listening in from. Welcome to today's live Q&A session presented by ThreatX. I'm your host, Jeremy Ventura, Director of Security Strategy and also Field CISO. Today, we actually have a really interesting topic to discuss around credential stuffing and the trends that we're seeing in this space. We're going to be discussing and introducing our newest initiative, also called ThreatX Labs, and the benefits to the entire security community. In addition, we're going to also deep dive into the first two new reports that this team has produced. First, without further ado, let me introduce you to our two new guests today, which both happen to be members of the ThreatX Labs team. Both of these gentlemen are both senior security researchers who have dedicated their time actively researching new trends like 0 days, proactively threat hunting, and also developing and innovating new technologies for our customers. First, let me introduce you to senior security researcher Alex Gatz.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for having me on today. I'm Alex Gatz. I've been with ThreatX for about a year and a half now. Very passionate about technology. Love researching and trying to find new ways to protect our customers. We've been doing a lot over here. We coming up with brand new technologies that I think everybody's going to be really excited about really soon.
Perfect. Thanks, Alex. And next, without further ado, Javier Rivera. Javier might be on mute. Well, there you go.
There we go.
Am I back?
You're back.
It's always a fight. Hey, Javier Rivera here, senior security researcher with ThreatX for about 8 months. Previous life was red teaming and vulnerability assessments from a broad spectrum of products. I started with mobile application analysis, moved to network services, went into Linux and Windows applications too. So I've been through most of it already, at least in the generic sense of it. And I decided about 8 months ago that I wanted a little bit of a shift to actually not just look at the red teaming and the offensive side. I'll pull a little bit back on that and start applying how can I apply this knowledge to the defensive side too, to help out whoever the customers are, and the people that I'm actually helping with the offensive side, actually help them fix what we discovered. So happy to be here.
Perfect. Thank you, Javier. Thank you, Alex, both of you for joining me today in this live Q&A session. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So the first thing I want to talk about is obviously the new announcement here at ThreatX that we introduced the ThreatX Labs. So Alex, I'll start with you. Can you explain a little bit what is ThreatX Labs? What is the initiatives? And what is the mission and goals of the team that you're on?
Yeah, so I think the primary mission is really just identify what the biggest threats are today and find the most efficient and effective method of preventing those threats from impacting our customers. So we look at we look at all of our customers' data, and we try to pick the most interesting things that are going on. So the biggest thing we've been seeing most recently and really over the past year plus is credential stuffing, and that's why we ended up doing these research papers that we're going to discuss later. With that, we I guess more about ThreatX Labs. So we also support our SOC team. I don't know, I'm sure many of you are aware we have a kind of a SOC as a service that closely supports our proprietary WAF. So the from our standpoint, we would kind of do I don't know if you call it meta research in a way. We would investigate the attacks, identify an automated process that the SOC could implement, and allow them to more easily kind of take action on any events that are popping up. So that might be tooling them out with new alerting. Maybe we're setting them up with dashboards and maybe Grafana and Prometheus, and giving them something that they can quickly identify what's going on and have the biggest possible impact.
Perfect. That's a great explanation. And Javier, I'm going to ask on you too a little bit on the ThreatX Labs component, because you're also a member of the team. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the innovation and kind of that direction of the ThreatX Lab team? So obviously you guys are doing a lot of research, you're doing a lot of threat intelligence, threat hunting, but there's a big component of the innovation part and kind of what we're seeing in the field, and then how we're actually bringing that back into the product. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the innovation component.
Yeah, sure. I can expand a little bit more on what Alex was talking about, the integration that we have with the SOC, right? Because that's our main line of defense in terms of, hey, when we see attacks, that's sort of like we help them out, but that they are the first line of defense in terms of they see the data and then they come to us if they find something that's really juicy that we should be looking at, right? So in terms of the dashboards or the capabilities that we're trying to provide new to the SOC at least, we came up with this thing. Trying to implement seasonality in terms of if you look at a customer, for example, and you see that the patterns of attacks or normal traffic are deviated from the norm from a week ago or whatever, then that might be indicating, hey, there's something going on here. Reach back to the customer and let's look at the data that we have right now. These data points that we're getting from our service or our sensors, do they look legit? Do they look like there's something anomalous happening? And then that triggers that investigation or hunting faster than just waiting for events for a customer to tell you, hey, we have something going on here. Can you look into it? So it makes them a little bit more proactive. We also are starting to implement more cross-correlation techniques in terms of, hey, if we see an attack happening on X customer, how much metadata can we extract from that attack vector and then see if we can detect it somewhere in other customers before it actually happens on other customers, or when it starts ramping out on other customers, or even historic. So see where we're trying to fill the gaps on what the SOC and us can see manually and try to automate that process and give us that hey, something might be happening here. Take a look. Those are a couple of few things that we're doing for. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's super exciting. I know even when I talk to our prospects and customers alike, being able to introduce the ThreatX Lab teams and yourselves and the rest of the team is super powerful, right? Because it's really showing that we are innovating, right? We are doing some of that threat intelligence and cross correlation, cross pollination, as you mentioned, to really make sure we're protecting all of our customers alike. And so I think that's a really great segue into kind of getting into the nitty gritty of actually the team and what they've produced so far. So just recently, last month, we announced the ThreatX Labs initiative, and we released 2 new research papers. And the first one is really around the anatomy of a credential stuffing attack and breaking down what it is, what are we looking for, what are the different, the sauce behind it. And actually, if you see right here, for everyone watching, you can actually download here via the QR code, the first paper that I'm talking about the anatomy of credential stuffing attack. And so let's dig down into this paper a little bit about credential stuffing in general. As we know, credential stuffing isn't really new, right? It's been around for a while, but we're still seeing attacks and organizations being hit with these credential stuffing attacks over and over and over. Just recently, just last month, right, we saw one of the largest e-commerce companies, I won't say the name, be affected with 35,000 username and passwords being compromised. Now, when you start to research a little bit about this incident, the organization itself that was compromised, it wasn't actually them. It wasn't like an attacker got into their database and stole the credentials. What happened was, and this is very common in credential stuffing, is the attackers are using automated tools, right? And they're usually buying these username and passwords on the dark net. Typically, it's in a big bulk, and they have some type of botnet or some type of script that can go out and bang against a certain login page or a certain website. And it's testing all these usernames and passwords, trying to just get one right. If you can get one right, boom, you're in, especially if those organizations aren't leveraging technologies like multi-factor authentication or some other type of two-factor. And so we really break down in this first paper what is a credential stuffing attack and the anatomy that we're seeing. So Alex, I'll start with you, just kind of looking into credential stuffing in general in the first paper. Why are we still seeing credential stuffing attacks happen?
Yeah, I don't. Maybe Javier could take that one because that one's his paper.
That's fine. Yeah. So I mean, as you mentioned, Jeremy, the fact that this is becoming easier and easier to actually launch these attacks, and the information is getting more and more available. The breaches that happen, they get sold in the darknet, or even let's say you're malicious enough, you can get have I been pawned databases, right? You can maybe act as a benign research or something, and from there start launching stuff, right? So it's becoming more the line's getting it's more and more grayed out. Essentially, it's more blurry as time passes. So it's becoming more easier to deploy this kind of botnets. And again, even when you have script kiddies just launching against everything, we can see it in our customers. We see sometimes the same data set of credentials across multiple customers, right? It's just, and even for applications that are not even what they're supposed to be targeting. Let's say the application is a WordPress app, we see stuff that is for, I don't know, like a Rails app, right, or something. Some different. The difference there's, but it's clear from whoever's watching the event. But for someone that's launching that botnet, it's becoming easier and easier to just launch. You have got no repercussions to go through a VPN, multiple CDNs, you can use multiple techniques to hide where you're coming from, for network, you name it. That's why it's becoming more easier to just keep going at it.
And I think what's interesting on that, and maybe Alex, you want to comment on this one, is we're seeing a trend now. I know through a lot of research that I've been doing just personally on the side, that botnets typically were going, they're collecting IP addresses from your typical assets or endpoints like a server or a laptop. Mm-hmm. But I think we're starting to see a trend now, and we just saw something in the news recently where a lot of these endpoints aren't your traditional hardware and software. They're coming in from things like IoT devices, like the smart refrigerator in my house, or potentially a smart lawnmower. I just saw one of those recently where it's like, oh, okay, well, this is connecting to my home network and it might be compromised. So Alex, comment a little bit on why are we starting to see this trend? Is it because maybe the manufacturers in these IoT devices aren't actually including security when they build?
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely very likely. I think really it's just like the attackers are just looking for the lowest hanging fruit, right? Like there's just scanners running constantly, harvesting devices, and then they're organizing them into groups, possibly, and selling those as a rent-a-botnet service, right?
Yep.
So it's not just IoT. I mean, that's definitely a more popular target, especially recently as our homes get more and more connected to the internet, right? I'm also seeing a lot of like cell phone farms, which maybe isn't recent news, but I think what's more interesting there is the volume of cell phones being used is pretty impressive. I mean, like orders of tens and hundreds of thousands of cell phones being harvested, as well as IoT devices being harvested, and all using in coordination in a single attack, where they're spreading these login attempts out by like 30 minutes per request, or maybe even longer. So like traditional methods of just kind of rate limiting per IP, or like tracking those requests per IP just doesn't work like it used to. It really doesn't work at all in these types of attacks that we're seeing now.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes total sense. And I think, when you look at you can call it the kill chain, or like when organizations will go back in time after there's been an incident and they're looking at, what were the patterns? What was the recognition? Like, what was the timeline of how this incident happened? I think a lot of times organizations are using bots and credential stuffing almost in a low and slow fashion, right? They're pinging, they're trying to see and get undetected, right? The last goal they have is to be detected, right? If there's a technology in place, be like, oh, wait, something's going on. We're blocking this. We're stopping this, right? As a goal of an attacker, you want to go undetected, right? You want to go maybe low and slow. You want to maybe ping the website with maybe, the rate limiting of the threshold based upon some reconnaissance is maybe 15,000 RPS or whatever it might be. And so if I can get under that threshold and still be able to attack that organization, right? I'm probing, right? I'm gaining more reconnaissance, more information to potentially set up something even more catastrophic down the line. And I know we've come out at ThreatX here, and everybody can go check it out on our blog with a bunch of different blog posts around what we call multi-vector attacks. And really that means using a combination of different phases, different techniques, different attack patterns to attack an organization. And it really goes back to that encompassing principle of low and slow. And I think more times than not, when you think about these multi-attack vector attacks, you're actually thinking about the starting point being a botnet, or even potentially that botnet is doing some type of credential stuffing, right? Being able to probe and do some reconnaissance on that organization. So Alex, I'll ask you this question. So when we go over to, I guess, the new, as organizations advance, right? We hear organizations all the time going through this digital transformation. We're moving more to the cloud. As we start to go through that, take credential stuffing off the table for a second. When we think about API security threats, and we think about, in general, credential stuffing is obviously just one type of API security threat that can attack an organization. Are we seeing actual things within our SOC or within the research within our customers that are using kind of that multi-vector attack where you've seen and be able to potentially proactively block based upon certain characteristics or attributes? So meaning we know in botnets, devices change, right? IP addresses can quickly and frequently rotate. So with that being said, Alex or Javier, I'll kind of let you guys comment on what are some of the attack patterns or attributes that organizations should be looking for?
That is a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think we here at ThreatX like to think about it as like behaviors of an attack. Like what behaviors the attacker, projecting, as in like, are they doing enumeration first? Are they doing some other kind of scanning? Is it Nmap? Is it SQL map? Is it any of those types of things? And then from that, I think the issue there really is when you get away from the IP based approach and you're trying to look at, well, maybe this botnet is actually, while it's not doing credential stuffing, but actually it's like probing for specific pieces of information, and you're distributing those requests across 1,000 IPs, that then like enumeration becomes much harder to detect also. And then lots of other things become, if you could spread SQL map, for example, and try an individual SQL injection across like 1,000 or 10,000 IPs per IP, and then collect that all back in a centralized location, that presents a much more difficult problem for blue teams, definitely.
I mean, one thing you can try and do, right? Because as Alex mentioned, the IP restriction or metadata point is not enough nowadays. So one thing you can do is look at the other metadata that's available to you. For example, Alex brought up hey, we see more of these cell farms, right? Just popping up and trying to different devices, or from the user agent's perspective, right? Because that's all we see for now. It's the iOS or different versions of Android, and suddenly the same IP or the same IP set is coming from Firefox or Windows or like an IE, like an old browser, right? So looking at those rotations might help you. One, maybe this IP is tied to something finicky. Maybe they're doing a user rotation. Maybe the TLS fingerprint is rotating because they're rotating certs or something they're trying to use to connect. But more, right? For example, let's say as an attacker, I want to go, okay, I want to test my botnet with this set of user agents and everything else. Find something specific with, let's say I got one credential to work. Maybe I will not try just from that botnet. I will go from another IP, selected IP, where like looks like a legitimate user now. So now how to combat that? Well, you got to have like that information. You got to be able to tie those credentials somehow, and the application itself, the application started to target. So that's some sort of the correlation you can do. And even if they're trying to do it from the dummy way and not hide it from like as a legitimate client, let's say they go from a terminal or a Python script or something, you might be able to say, okay, maybe the order of operations here, you should be able to get the page first for the login before you post the credentials, and then you went straight up and posted it, right? That kind of behavior is the behavior that Alex is talking about. When now it's not anymore about the IPs or even some of the metadata. Is how are these clients behaving against the server or the services that they're going against?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And so I think, for viewers that are listening, when you're looking for different solutions, or when you're looking for what product can I put in place or what service can I put in place, it's a lot of what Alex and Javier are talking about, right? It's a lot of times organizations, when I'm talking to them, they put point solutions in place, and they're all disparate and they all don't talk to each other. And they may be good at a certain function or a certain capability, but really being able to get that context. I think, when I listen to Alex and Javier, the one thing I'm taking from both of them is, how do I take this context? How do I take all the different patterns of what's going on with the organization and correlate that, make sense of it, right? How can I package it all together and understand that this is actually a real attack versus not a real attack? And we've seen that over and over. I was in the UK last week, and when I was talking to individuals out there, the way when I was explaining bot attacks, they were a younger crew, and they were trying to like understand what I was saying. And I said, remember when Taylor Swift came out and her concert came out, or even when you try to go get the new Air Jordans from Nike, and it's like, man, I'm trying. Like I signed up right at 11 o'clock.
You cannot get them. Yeah.
I can't. Why can't I get it? Right. And we saw this implosion of bots. And so it brought up an interesting conversation that not all bots are actually bad as well, right? There are use cases for bots that potentially could be good. Now, I think it's like everything, right? It's like an intended use. So when we think about breaches, when we think about hacks, a lot of the times when this stems from, or when organizations are taken advantage of, is really the misuse of something. Like when we think about APIs, for example, APIs are good and great, but we know natively APIs aren't secure. And so it's really about the intended use. So if somebody with a malicious intent gets their hand on a botnet or an API and wants to use it in whatever fashion they want, well, that's when it starts to become nefarious, right? That's when it starts to become malicious. And so with that being said, I want to turn it over a little bit to the last paper where we actually go into a little bit more of a use case and story. So Alex, Javier, I'll let both of you kind of take this and piggyback off each other. But can we leave the audience with maybe just a cool use case or a war story about, something that we saw that we were able to, based upon everything you guys were saying, based upon some of the patterns and correlation, where we were able to actually stop an attack in its tracks?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to pick one. It seems that there's not just one. I mean, we've stopped a lot. I mean, to be not to brag, but we've successfully stopped a lot of attacks. Let's say that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe a more recent story. One of the credit unions we protect. This is maybe I don't know. In contrast to like some other recent attacks, I don't know if this is maybe like the biggest one that we've seen, but recent one, we had a credit union. The RPS shot up to like over 3,000. Started collecting data right away. I like to use Jupyter notebooks and kind of like deep dive into maybe like frequency-based analysis, and that's actually what my paper is about, is using frequency-based analysis to try to derive like useful pieces of information, because since the baseline from a credit union may only have like 0.5 RPS, when you have 3,000 RPS, since the volume is so great, it's really easy to use that process and kind of like cherry pick useful pieces of information out of there. So I did kind of allude to some of these examples there, but anyway, so it shot up to 3,000 RPS. The attacker was using user agent rotation. That became very quickly apparent. They were using legitimate user agents, which isn't seen all the time, but I think more savvy botnet rental services maybe they provide that as like an extra fee. You just kind of you click a checkbox and they tack on a little extra cost and you get user agent rotation. But anyway, so there's user agent rotation, and obviously, we blocked via user agent rotation in that case. Another interesting case I saw was using TLS fingerprint rotation, which that's honestly, I think, a little more difficult to pull off while using valid TLS fingerprints. It's easy to just rotate TLS fingerprints, but it's hard. It's more difficult to pull off and actually have valid TLS fingerprints. So those cases we can actually detect and block that as well. So that's another useful little tidbit there. But I don't know, probably not the greatest story. Maybe Javier's got some more color to add to that, but it was
No,
a good one.
unfortunately, I think that's the last couple of attacks that we stop have been more or less of the same vein. Like, hey, we're rotating user agents, or TLS fingerprint, or a combination of those. The one that's on my paper is about they were doing a weird credential style was also rotating the client time zone, and that's one of the things I go through. Like, hey, look at all the components, even the parameters that are being passed in the request too, because that might be where the botnet is doing its magic. It might have been that the botnet was in a previous live or a previous attempt, right? It was injecting IP addresses on the client time. That's the one that could be a mechanism of bypassing current signatures or the line of defense. Okay, maybe client time zone IP look valid because you don't know how to compare it to, so it just goes through. Or maybe they knew something about the application and say, or a previous application that used the client time zone, and they had like a weird either deserialization issue or something, where you take that client time zone and actually does something with the IP or pings out or tries to do a check that no one knows about besides the developers, right? So that kind of behavior and that kind of rotation is the one that comes to mind for the last couple of attacks. They're getting more intricate. Or before you could just see, as mentioned, like, hey, normal like dummy TLS fingerprints that don't make sense, or dummy user agents. But nowadays they're coming with subsets of, and even tools like SQL now, they have their own subset of legitimate user agents from years ago till now, and they keep updating it, right? So they can launch attacks and look like legitimate users, or at least clients from the user agent's perspective, and TLS fingerprints. So what else can you extract from them? That's when you start looking at the metadata, like the queries, the URI, the parameters, the body, other headers are being passed for the botnet to make use of them later on, right, as identifiers.
Perfect. No, that's great information from both of you. And, you both digged into a little bit of not only some of the different characteristics and attributes of what you're looking at, but also how attackers are advancing too, right? You both mentioned a couple of different tools and other services that attackers are adding on to just, the typical of, let me just try to scrape a website and use username and passwords to try to get in. So we're almost coming up here on time. And so I want to give each of you just kind of final say and final word here. Alex, I'll start with you. Especially for a lot of the audience members that are listening today and that are going to be listening on demand, when they listen to this, there's going to be, one thing that they can take from it. So do you have a best practice or a best tip? And obviously there's probably a lot of them when it comes to credential stuffing, but what would you like to leave the audience with, just with one thing today?
Yeah, I mean, I have to lean on my paper. I worked really hard to make sure that was a clean process for someone to use in these exact situations, that's repeatable and not only useful for credential stuffing, but also very useful for any kind of largely distributed botnet-based attacks. Anything where the volume of the attack far exceeds the baseline of requests. I think the process I outlined in the paper is exceedingly helpful in grabbing key pieces of information that you can use to improve your protection. I mean, that's really it.
Perfect. And Javier?
Yeah. I'm gonna piggyback a little bit on Alex's paper, because that's part of what we use for when you look at the anatomy of the custom botnet that we have put the paper out. It uses some of the frequency analysis to determine, hey, what is the botnet doing? How can we improve here by using the different components of the attack, right? And try to see how much of these, how unique are the usernames that it's using on the credential stuffing attack. Maybe it's just one, and I go through that, right? Maybe there's one username and a lot of passwords, so there's someone, they clearly have a targeted account that they want to go after. Or it's just a one-to-one mapping, like one username, one password, and that just rotates every single time because they just got a dump of a database somewhere, and that's what they're trying against. So always go look for those behaviors that the botnet itself is trying to go base itself on, and then go start the hunt from those outliers and go deeper as you need to.
No, that's awesome. And once again, I know we're running up here on time, but Alex, Javier, thank you both again for joining me today in this live Q&A session. For everybody watching and listening on demand, you can get in contact with Alex and Javier via their LinkedIn, but also with the ThreatX Labs page on our website on threatx.com. You can actually subscribe there and enter your email address. And so when the team members that you see here producing new content or new resources and new white papers, you'll automatically get notified and be able to have that in your inbox. In addition, there are also some QR codes that you saw in there. And be on the lookout for some more new and exciting announcements from ThreatX as we expand into 2023 and we continue to increase our visibility and make sure that we're spreading right information into the world. So Alex, Javier, again, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for listening in today.
Anytime.
Thanks a lot. Glad to be here.